This is Liz Weaver, and you are listening to the Learning Success Podcast, an information-packed podcast with the latest news, information, and tips to help you overcome a learning difficulty. For anyone suffering from a reading difficulty, writing difficulty, a math difficulty, a focus problem, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, or ADHD, this is the place for you. The Learning Success Podcast is brought to you by LearningSuccessSystem.com.
Hello, and welcome to the Learning Success Podcast, where we learn to embrace your child's brilliance and unleash their true potential. I'm Phil Weaver. I'll be your host today, and today's guest is Ian Morgan Cron. In addition to being a dad, Ian is also a psychotherapist, best-selling author, sought-after speaker, businessman, and Episcopal priest. But Ian is also regarded as one of the leading masters of the popular Enneagram personality typing system. I'm curious how many of our listeners today are familiar with the Enneagram. Much to my surprise, prior to meeting Ian, I had never heard of it, which piqued my interest even more. So, rooted in ancient spirituality, the Enneagram has an uncanny accuracy in describing how human beings are wired both positively and negatively. Used as a tool to help leaders cultivate self-awareness and emotional wisdom, the Enneagram has become a resource for people across the world as they seek to better understand themselves and see the world through other people's eyes. Could you imagine discerning how and why people think, feel, and act the way they do? That's what happens when you grasp the Enneagram. We thought it would be interesting to have Ian join us today so we can learn more about the Enneagram, but also so we can equip you as parents to have better understanding of yourself and to know how your personality type can deeply impact your parenting style. And I'm excited to learn today. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Phil. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for coming on. This should be quite interesting here. So let's start off with right at the top. Can you just give us, tell us about the Enneagram, what it is, and where it originated from?
Sure. The Enneagram is an ancient personality typing system that teaches there are 9 core personality styles in the world, one of which people gravitate toward and adopt in childhood as a way to cope and navigate the world of relationships. Most importantly, each of those 9 types has an unconscious strategy or motivation that powerfully influences how that type acts, thinks, and feels on a daily basis. Its roots go back thousands of years, though it wasn't fully formulated thousands of years ago. It existed then in its primitive form in the 20th century. It was conflated with modern psychology. And so it's been a work in progress for a long, long time. And but one of the things that people have found is that it is uncannily accurate in its ability to help people understand what it's like to live in other people's shoes, to understand that there are many different ways of seeing and experiencing the world.
Okay, great. And so you said it goes back thousands of years. Where was that? What society and history? Where did it come from exactly?
Well, we think it began with a Christian monk named Evagrius Ponticus in the 4th century.
Okay.
And he used it in helping to disciple or to do spiritual formation with young people out in the desert, of Egypt and Syria and that area of the world.
Okay. And so it's thought that he devised it then?
He is a person who devised a very primitive iteration of it. It wasn't until it's become much more evolved and complicated now and accurate than it was then. But those are those are its roots or origins.
Right. Was that a gradual process or something that psychologists today picked up?
I think it was a gradual process. It really came to the public's eye in the 1970s when Catholic Jesuit priests began using it as a tool to help train young novices for the priesthood. So It really came to us first through the Catholic Church, but has spread like wildfire in recent days.
Good. So you mentioned it's going to help understanding how other people may think and act, and it's some. So first off, is it the belief is that we are born with these personality traits, or are these developed early in childhood? Or
the answer is yes.
Right.
The human. First of all, let's begin here. The human personality is a tremendously complex thing, right? People are mysterious, and really, we believe that the personality is formed by genetics, right? Biology.
Sure.
So there's some stuff that's just hardwired into us. I don't know if you have kids like this, but some kids are just born naturally anxious. Others come into the world slightly depressive, Eeyore types. Some come into the world bold and laughing, and others are very challenging and strong. So I've seen this with little kids all the time. You see these things hardwired into them, and the role of parents is to help kids steward this hardwiring that they have. Now, there are other factors than that as they get older that also come into play. One is that there's cultural factors. What does the culture expect of them? There's familial forces that come into play, forming a personality. So it's not any one thing. It's a confluence of many things that bring the human personality into its fullness.
Right. But with a genetic, there seems to be a genetic component where there is at least a large part that is at birth then. Is that an assumption?
It kind of depends on what school of psychology you speak to.
Okay.
There are many of them, and actually I would say that the most hotly contested debate in psychology is personality and its formation.
I got you. Yeah, sure.
So there are lots of different perspectives on how it's formed.
Right. Yeah, well, just about every parent you hear saying that about their child, that they just came out that way, that their personality was, you hear that phrase all the time. So, so before we get too deep into it, what are the benefits you've talked about for parents of understanding better and all that, but what are the overall benefits for a parent to understand this material?
Well, let me say this. About 3 times a week, my wife and I say to each other, boy, if we'd only known the Enneagram when our kids were little, if we had, we would have parented them very, very differently. Now, they've turned out to be 3 magnificent, beautiful kids, right?
Uh-huh.
But if we could have known what their interior world was like, if we could have known how they predictably and habitually acted, thought, and felt as kids, it would have given us a great advantage, especially in adolescence and afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And the most important thing is for parents to know their type as they raise their own children, what are their strengths and pitfalls? What's the best and the worst about their personality? Because the Enneagram actually shows you that, that your blessing is your curse and your curse is your blessing. There's a great side to your personality.
Yes.
And then there's another side that if you're unaware of it and you're not, properly monitoring it, will get you into a lot of trouble.
Right. So that's it. That would be one of the greater benefits of being able to monitor your downsides better.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's go ahead and can we jump into the different types?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna give you literally 1-sentence descriptors, but I can tell you, like for example, in The Road Back to You, this book I wrote about the Enneagram, each of these gets 20 pages, and so I'm just giving you a thumbnail sketch of each. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one are called the ones, and they're the perfectionists, also called the perfectionists. These are folks who are ethical, they're detail-oriented, they're really morally heroic people who have an unconscious motivation or strategy that has to do with their desire to improve themselves, others, and the world. Now, another way to say that is perfect themselves, others, and the world. Twos are called the helpers. These are warm, caring, and giving people whose unconscious motivation is to meet the needs of other people while at the same time not acknowledging their own personal needs.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Third type is called the performer or the achiever. These are driven, ambitious, success-oriented, image-conscious people who have a need to succeed, to appear successful, and to avoid failure at all costs. The four is called the individualist. This is a slightly more complex type of person. Moody, temperamental, creative, wildly creative, imaginative. These are people who have a need to be unique and special in order to compensate for what they perceive is a missing piece or fatal flaw at the core of their person. So you see a disproportionate number of fours in the artistic community. Okay, so fives are called the investigators. Sometimes they're called the observers. They're the most analytical number on the Enneagram. They have wild powers of analysis. They're also the most emotionally detached number on the Enneagram. You know, fives sometimes are loners, and they have a need to gain knowledge and information in order to fend off a world that feels like it's just asking too much from them, you know, particularly in the relational sphere, all right? Sixes are called the loyalists. We believe there are more sixes in the world than any other type. Sixes have a need to feel safe and secure in what feels to them like an unpredictable and chaotic world. So you know sixes in your own life. Well, you know all nine types in your own life, but sixes are the ones who are worst case scenario thinkers. I sometimes say that sixes have pre-traumatic stress disorder. They're always scanning the horizon, looking for what could go wrong, and planning in advance what they're going to do when catastrophe strikes. That's one feature of that six's personality. Sevens are called the enthusiasts. Think Stephen Colbert. These are the joy bombs of the Enneagram. Their need is to avoid difficult and painful emotions. And the way they do that is by thinking about a future of unlimited possibilities, adventure, escapades. What new and exciting thing can I do? And that's all in service to not being in the present moment and avoiding suffering. Okay?
Okay.
Nines, or eights, I should say, are called the challengers. Okay, eights are notoriously blunt, can be domineering and confrontational. They have a need to assert strength and control over the environment and other people in order to mask weakness and vulnerability in themselves. Okay? And finally, there's the nine. We oftentimes call nines the sweethearts of the Enneagram. Nines are these beautiful, easygoing, don't rock the boat, Hakuna Matata types who have a deep need to avoid conflict at all costs and to maintain connection with other people.
I see. Good. Okay. And are you going to fill us in on which one you are? And
yeah, sure. I'm a 4.
You're a 4. Okay.
One of the individualists.
That's the rare one, right?
We think there are fewer 4s than any other number on the Enneagram represented in the population, which 4s just love to hear because they just want to be special and unique.
Okay. So I imagine if you figure out what people are, then that would enable you to be more persuasive with them. Is that if you're looking? Is that maybe looking at their? Well, you just said 4s love to be unique and love to be. So if somebody knew that, not that you want to do that in a negative manner, but it seems like maybe a weakness could be used against someone.
Yeah, I rarely see that.
Okay.
But I think the Enneagram, what it does is it helps us understand and get inside of someone else's worldview.
When you were speaking, it really seemed to me like an empathy generator. Like you.
Yes. It when people first are introduced to the Enneagram, one of the amazing things that happens is compassion wells up, empathy wells up, understanding comes to the surface. People realize, oh my gosh, people see the world differently than I do. I work with a lot of corporate CEOs and management teams, and I tell them all the time, and this would be true for parents, that one of the most egregious mistakes a person can make is to believe that their way of seeing the world is normal, right? That if the Enneagram is right, there are 9 normals, right? 9 normal ways of seeing the world. And when you begin to see that and understand it, it really gives you a tremendous advantage in relationships.
It's there's the recent events with this COVID-19 thing has really been for me an awakening moment as really starting to understand how people different think. I didn't have a framework to work from. Maybe this would have helped, but that's been something that's been on my mind a lot because it's becoming more and more obvious that people think differently. So.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. It would be very difficult for you to answer, so don't worry if you can't. Of those 9 types, which one sounded most like you?
I am I am very certain that I'm a 5.
Yeah. So.
So would you have guessed that?
Yes.
You've only known me for a few moments.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would have. But that's because I'm very experienced.
Sure.
And I sometimes you can just pick it up watching somebody.
So facial expressions, body motion, body posture.
Yeah. So, for example, your face is not as animated as mine is, let's say.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if you've ever had someone tell you that it's very hard to figure out what you feel.
All the time, yeah.
And that you actually are. I'll tell you a few things about 5s if you like.
Actually, most people get it wrong when they try to figure out what I'm.
Yes. So 5s see a world that makes demands on them, but doesn't give enough supply, right? And this is particularly true in the area of relationships. So 5s find too much human contact depleting, right? Like it's in fact, I always tell 5s, the idea of social distancing is heaven to a 5. They typically are very introverted. They need to spend a lot of time in solitude and privacy. That's where they recharge. And they really have a lust for knowledge and information, particularly about niche subjects. And actually, 2 of my best friends are 5s, and one of them likes to tell me all the time, that he describes his face as a blank computer screen sometimes. He just says, and it's very hard to read him. But it doesn't mean that they don't have emotions. It just means, like, for example, with 5s, they actually have to think their way to their emotions. They're very cerebral. So if you gave me a great compliment that really deeply moved me, I might become tearful right now. a 5 might take 2 or 3 days to process that information before the feeling caught up to them. And even then, it might be more muted than it would be for other types. So anyway, I could go on about 5s. I'm a big fan of 5s, but I was fairly certain you were when you came on.
Yeah, so what you were just saying about that delay. So in general, when I was going through this list and looking at it, I recognized a lot of traits in other numbers that I certainly did not have, but have developed as over time. One of those, which was not on the list, but what you were just talking about, is the feelings. And through my Kung Fu, I've been doing Kung Fu for 25, 30 years now, which makes you more body aware. And when you're more body aware, you feel your feelings. But I remember earlier in life when I didn't. And like you said, that's absolutely true.
And yet, as children, what people don't know about 5s typically is that they're very sensitive. So even though, oftentimes 5s, or teachers will talk to me about this, that 5 children often are the children who you'll watch them, they tend to observe life rather than participate in it. So in other words, sometimes you'll see them on a playground at the perimeter while kids are running around on swings and slides and doing their thing. The 5 might be off to the side reading, the Chronicles of Narnia, or, a Tolkien fantasy book, or they're just observing what's happening on the playground. Now, eventually they'll get in, but they tend to observe and they're just constantly taking in information and analyzing it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, so it's clear, everybody contains all 9 types. So you will actually resonate with features of all 9 types. It's just that one is dominant.
Yeah.
One is more like you than all the others. And so if it's a 5, congratulations, you're a wonderful number.
Thank you. Wonderful. So I was going through, and it was very easy to peg myself with this, but I was trying to figure out my wife, and it was really difficult. Is that common to? I mean, I'm no expert in it. I've just been introduced to this, but I came up with either a 1, 6, or 8, and then when you were speaking and going through it, I was like, 6. But it was.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's some numbers are easier to spot than others. Some people have a harder time self-identifying and than others do. It took me, as a trained therapist, 10 months to figure out my type.
Really?
Yeah, and I won't go into the whole story of why, because it would be long and probably not all that interesting to your listeners. But the Enneagram is easy to learn and hard to master,
Okay.
But when you find out what your number is, you will have this feeling in your gut like someone's been reading my mail. Someone knows me far better than I ever imagined. And there are lots of people out there just like me. Now, you are a unique expression of a 5. There's no other 5 like you, but you share with all 5s just a whole constellation of traits and behaviors, ways of thinking, seeing, feeling, and behaving in the world.
Gotcha. How does this compare to? Is it the Myers-Briggs? Is that the name?
Yeah. So one of the things I've worked with Myers-Briggs, StrengthsFinder, DISC, Colby, Hogan, you name it. I mean, all these personality typing systems.
Okay.
The reason the Enneagram is my favorite is because it takes into account that the human personality is fluid and dynamic. Like your personality right now is in one mode, but if you were on a battlefield somewhere, your personality would change. It would adapt to that situation. In stress, your personality would change, right? When you work with I love all those tests, but they tend to be more static. They tend to see they describe the human personality in a very boxy way. Whereas the Enneagram describes what people are like when they're under stress, when they're feeling secure. It just gets our minds around this idea that our personalities are not fixed. They're always changing. In the course of a day, you might move from healthy to unhealthy in your personality. It's on a continuum, and so you're going to be going up and down as you face different things. And the Enneagram is helpful because it will help. What it does is it helps you predict what might happen or what will happen in different situations, so that you can make new choices than the ones you knew before you had that level of self-knowledge that the Enneagram gave you.
Right. So is it giving us, so we've mentioned that we're able, if we know it, able to spot our more negative traits or the things to watch out. Is it also going to give us a goal to work towards too? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the other thing I love about the Enneagram is that it has, for each type, a transformational growth path, right? So for
and it's
you,
somewhat laying that out through the knowledge of the Enneagram?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, for example, 5s typically have a scarcity mindset. They tend to be minimalists. They're not hoarders, although some actually are, but they tend to be very concerned about retaining what little they think they have, both in the material and in the interior world, right? This is why they're so private, why they tend to be... Some people will feel like when they're with a 5, like they're withholding personal information. So, for me, give an example. If you said to me, tell me all about your childhood, Ian, I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. I could jump right in and tell you the most personal things. You know what I'm saying? I could ask you the same question, and you would feel like it was prying.
Sure. Uh-huh.
So it's just different ways of seeing the world. So, I know if I met you and I knew you were a 5, for example, I would probably stand a foot further away from you than I would with other types.
Yes, that would be appropriate.
I would know not to tap you on the back or, because 5s have a need for boundaries, physical boundaries, right? They don't like people they don't know hugging them out of the blue. Doesn't bother me at all. So again, 9 normal ways of seeing the world, but different.
Sure. Okay. So going into picking one, how would say a 4 work with parenting? Like, what would be the things to watch out for, and what are the benefits of being a 4? Or
Sure. Well, at our best, 4s are the most empathic number on the Enneagram.
okay.
They are very comfortable. For example, as a therapist, as a person, I'm very comfortable in the presence of difficult feelings, right? As a priest, I don't have a parish anymore. I'm great at funerals. You know what I mean? Like, or in a hospital room, sitting with someone as they're dying. 4s. So with children, gosh, empathy is a huge value, right?
Sure.
But I would warn 4s about a few things. One is that 4s, how would I say this? 4s have to be very careful about taking things personally. They're very sensitive, right? So if a child says to you, if you ask your kid, hey, do you want to go out in the car, go grab an ice cream cone? Their kid says no. A 4 might withdraw and say, gosh, I must not be a very good parent, or, they just take things very personally. When actually the kid was just happy where they were. There was nothing personal about it, right?
Sure. Uh-huh.
I would say that they also need to be careful about exaggerating their emotional states, right? 4s don't have feelings, they are their feelings, And so they have to be careful with their children that they have they're tapping also into the ability to be good critical thinkers, right?
Okay.
So now, but they can be great. They're imaginative. They can be very fun with their children. So they bring both blessing and blight to it. Now, once you know, and I only just gave you just 2 examples.
Sure.
Once you know this information, like for me, I don't take it personally anymore. Which means that my kids don't feel guilty or ashamed when they tell me I don't want to do that with you.
Uh-huh.
Because they see my face fall. My face doesn't fall anymore. I'm just able to go, okay. So self-knowledge, which is one of the great gifts of the Enneagram, helps you relate to the world in a much more balanced and healthy way.
Sure. Yeah. It makes life, the more self-knowledge you get, it just makes life a lot more enjoyable and easier. Certainly does. So what would you, run the same thing through a 5? What are the positives and negatives in a parenting aspect?
Yeah, so a 5, boy, I've known some great 5 parents. A lot of 5s will tell me that parenting doesn't come naturally to them in some ways. Mm-hmm. They're not huggers. They need a lot of alone time. And sometimes their distance, their emotional distance, can sometimes message to a child a lack of interest in them. And so the 5 has to, I tell 5s all the time, intentionally hug your children and tell them that you love them every single day. Mm-hmm. Do the same with your partner. I think that 5s have to learn how to be deeply present in the moment with their child, because often they have these big minds, and once they get thinking about something else, they can kind of retreat far up into their heads, and others will interpret that as aloofness with kids. So, but I mean, 5s with kids can be great because, number 1, they're interesting as heck. They know a lot of really interesting stuff. They can be great sources of objective advice giving. Like 5s, if you give a 5 the information and say, hey, can you help me with this? Their powers of analysis are unparalleled. So when a kid comes to you, you will give them the objective truth as you understand it. And generally, it's right.
Okay, good. I was distracted by, you have a husky back there?
I have 3 dogs in my house right now, and 3 children and 2 of their spouses. So we are all in quarantine together here. It's really something.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
Do you have a smart child who is struggling in school? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Do you feel like the struggle is holding your child back from their true potential? Maybe the anxiety and worry over your child's future just beats you down every day. You don't have to live that way. Learn how to stop a learning disability from becoming a life disability. A child with a learning disability is stressful for the child and the parent. The disability may be eroding their confidence and shattering their self-esteem. Other people may perceive your child as unintelligent and antisocial. If not addressed and fixed early, the child may develop permanent challenges later in life when looking for a good job or meeting a potential spouse. Our current school system does not know how to properly help our children, but at Learning Success, we do. We've created a system you can easily do at home with your child, and with just 15 minutes per day after school with your child, you can save them from a life of struggle and heartbreak. Learn how to unleash your child's potential and embrace their true intelligence. As a special gift for being a loyal podcast listener, we're going to give you a free trial of the Learning Success System. Try it out absolutely free for 15 days. If it is not the perfect fit to help your child succeed in school and in life, just cancel before the trial ends and pay nothing. You even get to keep the free bonuses. Go to www.learningsuccesssystem.com/podcast to get your free trial now. You'll be so happy you did once you see the great grades your child is capable of getting. Imagine being so proud of your child when they bring home a great report card and hand it over with a beaming smile. Get your free trial now at www.learningsuccesssystem.com/podcast. You've got nothing to lose except the stress and anxiety that is holding you and your child down. I'll see you there.
So, do you have a moment to go over kind of all 9 as far as in parenting?
Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So ones make great parents. Think about Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. That's sort of the iconic one, right? They are wise, they're measured, they're attentive. They treat their children when they're in a good space with kindness and respect, right? But when they're not self-aware, ones can become judgmental, critical. They have very high internal standards, and they want others to conform to their high internal standards. A one that's not very self-aware sees the world, how would I say this? That there's 2 ways to do things, their way and the wrong way. Right? So I tell people, if you want to know if you're with a one, just do the dishwasher test, which is load the dishwasher and then stand back and see what they do when they open it and look at how you've done it, and they just start unloading it and reloading it because they have the right way to do it. You know what I'm saying?
Maybe my wife is a one.
So what I tell ones all the time is, number one, like for example, resist making snap judgments. So, at times, ones who lack self-awareness will reflexively point out their kids' mistakes whenever they do something that doesn't conform to their high internal standards. And over time, this will make their kids feel like failures who can't do anything right in their parents' eyes. All right, so that's a big one. I tell them to celebrate difference and to know that there are more ways to do things than their way. That's a one is really growing up when they can actually say, there's more than just one way to do something. There are other ways to do things. So I think those are important things with our children is to create an environment where they don't feel perpetually criticized or judged for not doing things perfectly, right? Which means in alignment with that one's view of how that should be done, whatever that thing is.
Sure. Okay. And then, what are the positive sides of that one then? There.
Well, there's so many. One parents are not typically huggers. But they're people who show up for your life. They make sure that the oil in the car is always filled, that the tires are changed, that the boiler is working in the winter, that the screens are on the windows, in the summer, that the kids have a lunch every day with a note in it. You know what I mean? They care a lot about the details and about creating a world in which their child is safe and can thrive. And I love and that, as I was mentioning Atticus Finch a moment ago, there's a great quote in it. It's at the very end of the book where Scout says, life with him, life without him was unbearable, and it's a beautiful testimony to ones. They bring so much stability and integrity.
The word was right. That's the word that was coming to mind there. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so can you go ahead and tell us about twos?
Yeah, twos are the warmest, they're kindest, most approachable, loving people on the Enneagram when they're healthy. They're highly attuned to the feelings of other people. I often laugh and say that twos know what you're feeling before you do. And they feel a need to meet your needs, actually, whether you want them to or not, So when they're not in a good space, they can be a little smothering, right? For example, as a parent. So I tell helper parents, number one, they got to set boundaries. Because when they lack self-awareness, they can become overly permissive and avoid setting boundaries with their kids, because they don't want to lose the love, the appreciation of their children. So they can get a little permissive. They need to resist rescuing children. This happens a lot with twos who aren't very self-aware. We want our kids to be safe, right? But we don't want to rescue them when they don't do their homework or when they're not doing what they're supposed to. They just need to deal with reality while we create a safe container for that to happen in. So unless you want a kid living at home at 35, it's really a good thing to, as a two, to allow them to meet reality as it is without rescuing them. All right? So I'm only giving you, of course, a couple, little tidbits here of things I would say. So threes are performers, achievers. Boy, I don't know if you've ever read the book Getting Things Done by David Allen.
I haven't read,
Okay.
No.
Okay, so these are the kinds of things that threes read. They're productivity hounds. They are ambitious. They have a lot of trouble not working. They have a need to really succeed, and so they often are workaholics, type A personalities. So what I tell them is, number one, practice intentional listening. Three parents can sometimes be talking to their child while in their mind be putting together a business plan. Because they're just multitasking all the time, And of course, the kids are smart. They know when they don't have the full attention of their parent, right?
Right.
So another one would be to let their kids accomplish their tasks in their own way. Sometimes a three will step in to tell their kids how they can complete a task more efficiently. They're very concerned with efficiencies. How can I get something done as fast as possible? So if they see a kid doing something that's going to take longer than it should, they'll jump right in and say, well, if you do it this way and do it that way, you'll get it done. You'll be more productive and you'll get it done faster. Mm-hmm. Right? Threes just have to be reminded that not everybody values efficiency as much as they do.
Okay. We can jump to six.
So, reliable, loyal, down to earth, practical, well prepared, funny as heck, detail oriented. Sixes are great parents when they're self aware, when they really know themselves. When they don't know themselves, they can become self doubting, alarmist, procrastinating, and they can start hovering over their kids' lives out of fear for their safety and well-being, right? So I tell six parents all the time, remember, number one, fear is contagious, right? Anxiety is contagious. So it's important for loyalist parents to rein in their anxiety to prevent it from spreading to their kids in an unhelpful way, right? That would be one thing. I would say, too, avoid making too many rules. Loyalists can become too dutiful and bound by rules. And sooner or later, imposing too many household codes and protocols will eventually anger your kids and move them to probably mutiny against the captain, you know? But they're great, great parents. And I'll give you one last one. Resist the temptation to catastrophize. Sixes see catastrophe everywhere. They have this vague feeling of apprehension about perceived threats all the time, you know? And so you want to make sure that you're not always catastrophizing, because it sets your kids up to see a world that's hostile, right? That's dangerous, and where they can't live without mom and dad's protection. Okay. So we don't want to create a catastrophe mindset for our children. We don't want them to be pessimists, right?
Right. Okay. Then we can jump to 7.
Well, I mean, who wouldn't want to have a 7 parent, the enthusiast? Gosh, they're fun, spontaneous, imaginative, creative, energetic, optimistic people. If 6s deal with their anxiety through pessimism, 7s do it through optimism.
Okay.
Right? They are eternally sunny people, right? I oftentimes, though, tell 7 parents that they need to learn how to be reliable. So enthusiast parents are a blast, but they have racy minds. They're easily distracted, and they tend to overcommit, which can lead them to lose track of the time and unintentionally not follow through on promises that they made in the glow of the moment. Or, you know, arrive 20 minutes late to pick the kids up at school because they were off, you know, doing something else and not paying attention. So they need to learn how to be reliable. Kids need to know that they can depend on you. More than any other number, 7s have trouble staying in the present moment. So I'm telling them all the time, be mindful of the moment. Stay. You know, a 7 is a little bit like a puppy on a leash, you know. Uh-huh. It wants to ramble all over the place, and you have to keep going, stay, stay focused, because their attention tends to migrate all the time to whatever is most interesting around them, right? And they're always thinking about the future and not staying in the present moment, right? And then lastly, they just have to accept the fact that with their children, they have to be the authority. Usually they like to flatten hierarchies because they don't want to be the bad cop.
Okay. Know? Yeah.
Because being the bad cop makes you have to feel bad feelings, which is what 7s don't want to feel, right? So I just tell them, hey, like it or not, you have to be the authority, because at the end of the day, kids don't want to live in a world without rules.
No, they don't.
It makes them anxious. A game of soccer is not that much fun when there are no cones or lines on the field. Mm-hmm. It's just chaos. But when you put the lines and the cones down, they know where the boundaries are. Now everybody can have a great game.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm always encouraging 7s to do.
Got it. Yeah, as martial arts teachers, that was one of the fundamental things that kids really loved. The regimented, the rule sets, and knowing what those rules are gave them a lot of confidence and sense of security. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah. So 8 parents. I was raised by a mother who was an 8.
Okay.
They are blunt, larger than life presences, you know. They can be confrontational. They're very comfortable with conflict. They're straight shooters, you know. They're just straight up forces of nature, you know. But they can also be intimidating to people, right?
Sure.
A 5, for example, would find an 8 oftentimes their energy overwhelming, because they're so aggressive sometimes and assertive, and but tremendous parents because they're very protective. They teach kids how to live in the world with confidence, you know.
Yeah.
And makes it great. But eights can have a temper that they really have to watch out for. They struggle with anger, right?
Sure.
And so I tell eights all the time, learn how to respond, not react to your children. Practice a pause. Count to 10 before you respond. Because oftentimes they are very quick to, and rush to say things, and they're a little bit more like steamrollers than diplomats, So they just have to be careful of that. They got to dial back their energy sometimes because it can be too much for their kids, and they have to learn how to apologize to their children because sometimes an eight thinks an apology is a sign of weakness rather than vulnerability. They confuse weakness and vulnerability.
Okay.
So it's important for them to learn how to be vulnerable enough to really just apologize to their children when they need to. And again, they can be great parents.
I see. Good. And then 9 seems very different from 8s then. The opposite end of that?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm married to a 9.
Okay.
I'm the father of a daughter who is a 9. They really are the sweethearts of the Enneagram. They are, when they're self-aware, they're the most easygoing, warm, don't rock the boat. They know how to keep the peace in the family, and they're so good at it. They can mediate arguments between children like nobody's business. They can bring everybody to the middle, which is why we call them the peacemakers, Our best presidents, I think, in the United States have all been 9s, because they're very good at seeing through everybody's perspective and the merits of everybody's perspective, and able to bring them to the table and figure out how do we reconcile all these perspectives. Right?
Yeah.
That's a real good thing with children. If you got a house full of kids, that's a good gift, They too, like 2s, they need to avoid being too permissive with their kids. 9s are really afraid of conflict. And so to avoid conflict, sometimes they'll let their kids get away with more than they should, right? They need to build healthy boundaries. It's hard for 9s to say no. So I tell parents all the time who are 9s, remember that saying no, or I can't do that for you, does not equate to I don't love you, right? So again, make all of these types, when they're healthy, when they're self-aware, when they know their blind spots, make incredible parents. They're just amazing. But when they lack self-awareness and self-knowledge, the more self-awareness and self-knowledge they lack, the worse it gets.
Okay.
They're on autopilot. They're in reactivity. They're just operating out of their personality, and that usually looks like someone banging guardrail to guardrail through people's lives, and it just doesn't work.
Sure. Is the Enneagram in general a good tool for becoming more self-aware?
Yes, I would say it's the best one I know. And I would define self-awareness as the ability to monitor and regulate your thoughts, feelings, and actions in real time as you're interacting with the world, right?
Sure.
It's the ability to see the effect your personality is having on another person or group.
Okay.
And being able to make adjustments so that the best outcome will come to pass.
Yes, I see. So I can see that if you knew the numbers of the people around you, that you could think very quickly, and if they're doing a certain thing that may conflict, you could understand that very quickly. But is the other side of that? Are there downfalls of kind of pigeonholing people into this?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to say about the Enneagram is that the Enneagram doesn't put you in a box. It actually tells you about the box you're already in and how to get out of it. Everybody is in a box of their own personality. That's just a fact. You know what I mean? Like we we come in, you came in the 5 box, I came in the 4 box. What the Enneagram does is say, hey, look, this is what the box is, and here's how you can get out of the self-defeating, self-limiting ways of thinking, acting, and feeling that have followed you throughout your life. They may have worked for you as a little kid to help you get your needs met, but in adulthood, they begin to work against you.
Uh-huh. Gotcha. So with the path then, once you see those qualities, would be moving towards the positive qualities within that box or more out to other boxes?
Well, I think...
as an initial path.
Yeah. So I think the path is different for everybody, but it begins with, acquiring self-knowledge, right? So you study your type, right? The next step would be self-observation. The ability, and you would be great at this as a 5, the ability to step back and observe yourself compassionately in a non-evaluative way.
Sure.
And just observe, what am I doing right now? How am I thinking, acting, and feeling in this moment? What story am I telling myself about what's happening right now? And when you have that kind of self-knowledge, you then can say, before I had self-knowledge, I would have reacted this way in this situation. I would have said this. I would have thought this. I would have, done this. Now I don't have to do that because I know that's just an old pattern. It's an old way of being in the world. I now have new choices because I know my type, and I've been working on myself to develop new ways of being in the world.
Okay, great. So tell us about, you have a parenting series going on right now. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so actually I just finished a series of 9 YouTube videos. We first released them on Instagram, and then they go onto my YouTube channel. It covers a lot of this material, but particularly through the lens of how to parent well in a time of crisis like the one we're in right now. So that's the sort of the twist on the series, it's been really wildly successful. I was very surprised at how many people wanted to know, how do I parent in quarantine? And it's a great opportunity really to develop self-knowledge and work on becoming your best self.
Okay, and that's on YouTube?
That's on YouTube.
Okay, So we'll put the link to that below, so make sure that people can get to that.
Right. It's called Enneagram and Stress.
Stressful, especially kids with parents now being their teachers and things like that. They're under a lot of stress. So children being stressed, they're probably not understanding what's going on, and now their parents are their teachers, and they're of course at home more all the time. Are people tending, of course, to dive into their lower selves in these personalities, or are they?
Yeah. Yes. Your personality under stress will change. So, for example, when you're this is what the Enneagram will teach you. We didn't have time to talk about security and stress. You're a 5. When you're in a really great place, you start to look like a healthy 8. It's like one of the biggest jumps on the Enneagram. A 5 will suddenly, that's typically kind of withdrawn, observe, you have the most powerful skill of observation. It's unbelievable. You don't miss a thing. But suddenly they become animated and big and just excited and larger than life in a way that they are not normally, right? When they're in a good space. But when you're not in a good space, you start to look like an unhealthy 7. And you start to get racy mind. Your thoughts, your zillions of thoughts and ideas start to come out, and not always in a way that's very coherent. You have trouble focusing, which is unusual for you when that happens, and you have trouble staying in the present moment. So the Enneagram actually will tell you, this is what you'll look like when things are going great. Here's what you're going to look like when things are going south. And you can catch yourself, once you have that knowledge, you can catch yourself before you go all the way, before you spiral all the way out.
Okay. And so then at that point, maybe use a mind-body technique or something to bring yourself out, or just the self-awareness itself.
Totally. The self-awareness is really the first start. The Enneagram breeds freedom to make other choices when you're not on the autopilot, which is what most people are, all day long. They're just running on autopilot.
Sure, right. It's interesting because, I mentioned I have about 30 years of Kung Fu under my belt, and so the 8 is the commanding, intense, confrontational. That's me when I'm on the mat.
It's an awesome thing for an 8 to do. One of the things I'm always telling 8s is you have to get back in your body. You are not a brain on a stick.
Uh-huh.
And so 8s tend, there's a character in one of James Joyce's books, and he describes him this way. Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll be talking to a 5 who's not very, like I can remember being in an emergency room with one of my kids getting stitches or something, and we were worried about a head injury. And this doctor came out, the surgeon came out, and he looked at us and with the most blank expression just began giving us all this medical report, none of which we could understand. We're upset. He wasn't attuned at all to it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I felt to myself, is he even inside his own body? Because he seems like his brain is over here looking at the conversation, watching it, but not actually in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So I tell 5s all the time, they should do yoga. They should do things like what you did. I've never thought about martial arts, but what a great thing for 5s to do. Also because it helps you energize in a way that 5s don't typically energize. Fives usually run on a lower temp, and so to get it hot and high, and also to be in a social context where you're dealing with people is really important for 5s. Otherwise, they'll spend their whole day trawling the internet, just gathering information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my students who only see that other side, that on the mat, they absolutely do not believe that I'm an introvert. They cannot convince them of it because they only see that other side of me. So
I would say that's part of your work, and you're doing it well.
Okay, good.
And another thing you might consider is beginning to see a world of abundance versus scarcity.
Yes.
Which is part of the journey for 5s.
Which is something I've been working on, actually. For some time.
Yeah. So again, this is the spiritual journey, if you will. And when I say spiritual, I mean that self-actualizing, self-discovery of meaning in life, to become the highest expression of your not just your personality, but of your soul, of yourself. This is what it's about.
Yeah, it really seems so. So I know you mentioned your book. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I wrote a book called The Road Back to You, an Enneagram Journey to Self-Discovery. And it's I have to say wonderful, because the book is now sold about 600,000 copies. And it has, not because I'm a genius writer, but because it's a primer on the Enneagram. Most books on the Enneagram are very dense, very long, and very dry. Content rich, wonderful material. But I wrote a book that would help a layperson who didn't want to quit their day job to study the Enneagram. I wrote a book that was accessible and easy to learn from, right?
Right.
So that's The Road Back to You, an Enneagram Journey to Self-Discovery. Mm-hmm.
I see. How to really get the benefits out of this, how deep does a person need to, I mean, is there a point of diminishing return, or is it just get...
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Another thing I love about the Enneagram is that you could just read my introduction to the Enneagram book and get enough out of it that you could move the needle in a meaningful way in your life and then never have to read another Enneagram book. Or it could be a gateway drug to the millions of other books on the Enneagram that are 500 or 600 pages and tend to be a little clinical. So you can know a little bit about the Enneagram and get a lot of benefit. That's the cool thing about it.
Great. Okay, good. And so I'm sure people are going to want to know what their own numbers are, and so how do they do that?
Well, they can actually, if they could actually go to my website, Ian Morgan Cron, IANMORGANCRON.com, and they'll see a tab for my Enneagram assessment, which is called the IEQ9. And I think it's the most accurate self-report assessment for the Enneagram that's available. Read my book. I mean, seriously, a lot of times people can just read my book and, like you, just reading a couple of sentences, they're like, I got it. I don't have to take a test. I just know right away, or get to a workshop, and I have courses that are running and people can learn about that. I have a course called Enneagram Made Simple. And so that also is on my website, and they can listen to my podcast, Typology. Just this month, we celebrated 10 million downloads. And what we do is we bring people in of different types to talk about their own experience as that type. Because think about it. Today, I just described other types for you, but they are so much better than I am at describing how they move through the world, right?
Sure.
So that's a narrative. It's called a narrative way of learning. So do one or do all. You won't be disappointed at the results for your life.
Yeah. So if they were to take the assessment, what information is that going to pump out for them? Is that just, here's your number, or?
No.
Okay.
No, there's two tests. One is a standard test. That gives a 22-page report. It tells you a great deal about your type and who you are. And then there's a pro level, which is about a 40-page report that has a lot more information in it. And but both are great. Both are great.
Interesting. Is there anything we haven't covered that's important to?
I don't know, Phil, but I'm so glad I had a chance to talk to a 5. They're some of my favorite people in the world. I'll tell you why. I think that 5s are often, particularly in relationships, the most misunderstood number on the Enneagram.
Okay, yeah.
And that is particularly true in relationships.
Sure.
4s are maybe the most mysterious, but 5s are the most misunderstood. And so are 8s, because 8s usually have a very tender heart behind all of that aggression. And people don't often see it because it's so well defended and masked. But when it comes out, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, great. Well, we will put all of the links to everything we've talked about here below the podcast, so people can get their assessment and your parenting course you're doing and book, all of that. So thank you very much for coming on. This is really intriguing to me, and I'm personally going to follow up and read your book and do much more with this.
Thank you for listening to the Learning Success Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. We also hope you have learned something useful, something that you can take back and improve your life with today. If you would like to say thank you, the best way for you to do that is to share this podcast with a friend. Help us help others along this journey. And if you haven't already, please rate and comment on the podcast. Every rating helps us and helps this podcast get out to more people. We appreciate it, and we appreciate you. Thank you again, and make today a great day. No one should have to live with a learning difficulty.